Yeah, if I went to a high school teacher and started to talk like this, I mean, they'd call the men in the white coats to take me away, right? However, when we talk to Stephen Hawking and we talk to other cosmologists, we do pick apart these time travel paradoxes, and we do look at science fiction. A lot of us physicists are secret science fiction readers, and we do have to analyze the very serious proposals being made by science fiction writers, except we do it, of course, using mathematics, not simply prose.
Of course, it always gets back into, but will science take us into back to the beginning, and whatever this God energy is, whatever different religions want to call it, will these answers ever be ours?
I was in a debate once in Mexico just a few months ago where the question was, does the universe have a purpose? And can we prove or disprove the universe has a purpose? In other words, is there a God? My point of view is that there's no experiment ever that'll determine whether or not there is a God or there's no God. So science is based on provable statements. So the existence of God is not provable, or the disproof of God is also not provable. Therefore, it is outside the boundary of science. It's not a scientific question. So I think that 1,000 years from now, people will still have some kind of radio program, and they're still going to debate that question because it's undecidable. You cannot decide it using an experiment.
But somehow along the way, religion and science became on two opposite sides, haven't they? I think a lot of things that has held back science in this country, or us funding different scientific things, has been because the religious community sees you guys as the enemy.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. Galileo once said that the purpose of the church is not to determine how the heavens go. The purpose of the church is to determine how to go to heaven. And so if you look at it that way, the science is about the way things is, and religion is about the way things should be. Then you begin to realize that the two are complementary. They're not necessarily at odds with each other. In order to understand where we should be going, you have to know how things are. So in other words, the more science you know, the more learned statements you can make about ethics. And so, for example, when the test tube baby first came out, the Catholic Church denounced the test tube baby without thinking about the consequences of test tube babies. And now maybe your wife, maybe your husband is a test tube baby, because people get used to it. And so I think if people who are ethicists study the science, they'll begin to realize that, hey, certain things are useful. They don't necessarily violate the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that test tube babies are unethical.
Talk to, what part of the future interests you the most? What part of it do you think, if you were a young man now entering the workplace, that you would like to study? And
well, I tell you, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been an explosion in the area of longevity research. The fountain of youth was once considered to be junk, quackery, the stuff of charlatans and hucksters. Now we're onto something. You realize that we're now isolating the genes that control the aging process of animals? This is huge. We can double the lifespan of most animals. And we found the gene now that makes it possible to double their lifespan. It's called SIR2, SIR2. It's not the fountain of youth. But one day when we do have the fountain of youth, I think this gene will be part of it. There's probably a constellation of genes that have doubled the lifespan of most animals. When we were chimpanzees, we didn't live very long, but now our lifespan has doubled. And so there's a single or maybe a few genes that doubled our lifespan from chimpanzees to humans. And so I think we're going to find them very soon.
And you think that we could extend life 2, 3, 4 times, or if you really start to look into cloning stuff, why ever?
I think that our grandkids may have the option of hitting the age of 30 and stopping and simply cruising at the age of 30 because they think 30 is a very nice age to be. I think that is well within the cards at the rate at which we are teasing apart the genes of animals. And of course, we're not that different, genetically speaking, except we live longer, we're much harder to experiment with. The genes that we have discovered that control the aging process in animals will have counterparts in human beings. For example, in the future, millions of us will have all our genes on a single CD-ROM. Maybe our credit card will have all our genes on it. We'll scan the genes of 1 million old people, compare it with the genes of 1 million young people, and subtract. And there will be the genes, a handful of genes, which basically control the aging process.
So we were born far too early. We really made a gigantic mistake here. If we would have waited a few decades, maybe we could have lived forever.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to read everything I could about this aging process, and I realized we were clueless. We didn't know the first thing about the aging process. Now we have the genes, we have the mechanisms, we know the enzymes, the proteins. We don't have the whole picture yet, but we're getting very close. And I said to myself, hey, maybe this is for my kids, or more likely, my grandkids.
That's kind of interesting, too, the way things have changed during your lifetime. Do you remember any of the things that you had to learn in school that now you're like, this seems almost ridiculous?
Yeah, you know, in our kids will simply have everything in their contact lens, and they'll wonder why we had to memorize all the sines and cosines and all the amino acids and stuff like that, when all you do is blink and your contact lens displays everything like that. So drudgery will be eliminated in school, and we'll teach concepts, we'll teach principles that drive all these silly facts and figures. And so learning will be a joy rather than tedium like it is many times today when you have to memorize so many different things.
We actually thought for thousands of years that memory was intellect. That if you could just bring up these facts, quote Shakespeare, or remember a date, that somehow you were an intellectual.
Yeah, then we realized that idiot savants can memorize things much better than us by a factor of several thousand, and they are, quote, idiots. They have IQs of about 60. And so we began to realize that memory is a filing cabinet. It's how you put them together, how you make the connections, and how you distill lessons. That's the essence of intelligence, not simply having a filing cabinet of facts and figures.
What is going to be the power of the future? Where are we going to be able to fuel all these smart rooms and smart cars and smart everything?
Well, I think in 10 years, solar power will be every bit as competitive to fossil fuels. I think we're going to enter a solar age in 10 years. Right now, solar, by the way, is twice as expensive as fossil fuels. Let's not get carried away. Solar is expensive. But in 10 years' time, it'll be competitive. And then in 20 years' time, fusion power becomes a viable option. The Europeans are betting the store on fusion. Fusion uses seawater, hydrogen from seawater, as the basic power source. The waste product is helium gas, which is commercially valuable. No nuclear waste, no accidents like in Japan. And these things are potentially viable in 10, 20-year time frame. So we could have unlimited power in that period of time. So global warming, as I see it, is a danger only for the next 10, 20, 30 years. After that, we'll enter a solar fusion age where we won't necessarily rely on fossil fuels so much.
And that's the interesting thing is it's science can get us out of the problems that a lot of times science started, but we can't ever go back, I think, as human beings. It doesn't feel almost correct for us to go backwards.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to go back. And I think, on the other hand, we see a future where we aren't going to be producing so much carbon dioxide with solar, renewable wind in the next decade, and beyond that, using seawater as the basic fuel for fusion plants. And so the amount of carbon dioxide that we put in the atmosphere in the next few decades will, however, ripple through society even in the solar age, which means that we will probably have dikes around some of our major cities in the future.
Wow.
Venice, for example, is at sea level, and many weeks out of the year, Venice is flooded. St. Marco Plaza is underwater. And so it means that we might have to have dikes around some of our great cities to preserve them as sea levels begin to rise, just on the basis of what we've already done to the atmosphere.
And do you think there's new cities in the future? I mean, you saw kind of a Dubai spring up out of nowhere, but do you think in the future the largest city in the world could be in Antarctica or someplace we don't even think about now?
Well, people used to think that there won't be any cities in the future because we'll simply teleconference, we'll all have Skype, and we'll all have meetings on Skype, and therefore we won't have to have cities. As you know, we went the other way. We still have commuting problems, we still have cities. And the reason for that is that we're social animals. We like to bond with other people. You like to look somebody in the eye. And to have a meeting where you have free-floating ideas and the juices are going, that's when you want to have person-to-person contact. And that's why we never did have the peopleless city. Those predictions came out wrong.
What about government? I mean, right now we're in a fairly international city here in New York City, and we know people now from all over the world that live in cities are kind of more similar to us than dissimilar. Do you see kind of a Star Trek one world government in the future?
I don't say one world government. However, I do see that nations are going to be less important in the future. We'll still have nations because we have to have taxation. We have to have the sewer system being cleaned up. We have to have standing armies for disputes and stuff like that. But the power of nations will be lessened, and especially the power of dictatorships. Now realize that throughout history, no two democracies have warred with each other. Think of every single war you had to memorize since you were in grade school. All of them have been between monarchies and dictatorships and more monarchies, but never between two democracies. And so as the internet democratizes the Middle East, democratizes large parts of the world, the fires of war will be lessened as a consequence. So what dictatorships fear the most is democracy. And what's bringing democracy to these dictatorships is Twitter and Facebook and the internet, and I think that's a good thing.
And overall, you're pretty optimistic about the future.
However, there are dark forces. There are some forces that don't like this march toward a scientific, multicultural society. And, for example, terrorists, people who believe in nuclear proliferation and germ warfare. These people want the forces of darkness to rule. Terrorists, of course, feel more comfortable in the year 1000 A.D. than in the year 2100 A.D. But it's a race against time. And I think that the forces of good, that is, the forces that are giving us more democracy, more freedoms, will eventually triumph.
The book is Physics of the Future. And even though it's not a book for children, I think this is a great family book for to kind of read out loud with the kids and for everybody to discuss it because
it's their future.
It is theirs, isn't it? Thank you so much, Dr. Kaku. Physics of the Future, already on the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm sure you've got a couple of other future projects you're working on as well, right?
Right, for the Science Channel and Discovery Channel.
Thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure.
Ron and Fez. The Ron and Fez Show.
What would you do? I'm asking you, what would you do to change this healthcare system for the better?
Get off my phone! Get off my phone, you little pinhead! Get off my phone!